resorts where the balloting has begun. This is a tradition that goes back 48 years. In the late 1950s, a man named Neil Tillotson purchased this resort. He soon realized that the nearest polling place was an hour away, so Tillotson, with his full-time employees, applied for and received permission to cast ballots at the resort. Their first election was 1960, and they've been voting at midnight ever since. Most of the registered voters in Dixville Notch are Republicans. Early on, they were all Republicans. And in that 1960 election, Richard Nixon beat John F. Kennedy here 9 votes to 0. Kennedy, however, won the general election, and Tillotson, the man in charge of Dixville Notch, thought that in order to keep the media interested, the resort needed some Democrats. So Tillotson believed that most of the French in New Hampshire in those days were Democrats, so he brought a few to the resort and hired them. Tillotson died several years ago, but his tradition lives on. As you can see, this will not take very long for them to actually calculate all of the results in Dixville Notch. And once we have those initial results of this, the 2008 presidential election, we will, of course, bring them to you. Again, this is a historic night, of course. This campaign has gone on for 2 years. And 2 years after the presidential campaign began, the last full day of speeches and rallies has, of course, come to a close. Today, the presidential candidates capped this history-making campaign with a final dash in battleground states. Barack Obama and John McCain poured it on as they tried to energize supporters and volunteers who are now, as we speak, ratcheting up massive Election Day get-out-the-vote operations across the country.
If you'll stand with me and fight with me, I promise you, we will not just win Florida, we'll win this election. You and I together will change this country. We'll change the world.
We need your help, and we will win. Volunteer, knock on doors, get your neighbors to the polls. I need your vote. We need to bring real change to Washington, and we have to fight for it.
Let's bring in Emily Heil. She's a staff writer for Roll Call. She also writes the column Heard on the Hill. And Emily, they are now counting the ballots in Dixville Notch, so I may interrupt you all of a sudden to hear what the result is there. But first of all, what's going through your mind? The election has begun.
Oh, it sure has. I think actually in that clip you just showed, I think there was an Obama lawyer in the background hovering around looking for hanging chads or something. Yeah, but the campaign, I guess, has begun, or the election has begun.
For all of the intensity of this last day, for all the sort of pomp and circumstance of Dixville Notch and sort of the quaint thing they do up there in New Hampshire, this really is now about organization, about getting out the vote, about all those volunteers all across the country, right?
It is, to a certain extent, but that doesn't mean that the candidates are going to, kick back at the palm with a martini. I mean, there is still a role for them to play in the last couple days. Sure, they're not going to move mountains unless, something happens, unless there's some sort of event or the narrative shifts in the last couple days. There's not much that candidates can do except drum home that final closing argument. But there is some kind of things that they're hoping to do around the edges. For Obama, it's hoping to make the turnout really big. For McCain, he's really going after those undecided voters that he really needs to have any sort of path to victory. So there are things for them to do, and they have to energize their ground game, too. And that's something that only a candidate can do. So those martinis are going to have to wait.
We are going to be talking later tonight about sort of the final rallies. In fact, we're going to be showing John McCain when he lands in Arizona. We'll be showing Barack Obama when he lands in Chicago tonight. But earlier, within about the last hour, Barack Obama had a rally in Manassas, Virginia, not too far from Washington, where they had an estimated perhaps 70 to 75,000 people, just a massive number. It's been like that for Barack Obama essentially over the past week, even longer. What do you make of it?
Well, it's interesting. I think that it shows that there is sort of an enthusiasm gap. You see larger crowds, say, for Sarah Palin than you do for John McCain. People are more enthusiastic about Sarah Palin, even though she does have higher negatives, too. Barack Obama has just always generated this sort of excitement and positive feelings. I mean, that's just been the way it has been all along the campaign. And I think some of it's attributable to, the kind of campaign he's run and really reaching out to younger people who will turn out for these giant, massive crowds. Of course, that's been used against him a couple times in the campaign when the McCain campaign has made this big, celebrity argument against Barack Obama. But in the end, I think that those big crowds will help him, particularly in this last push, because those are the very people he needs to get out and make the calls and to actually turn out at the polls.
You talk about sort of positive feelings for the candidates. I want to put up a telling number. This is from the latest NBC News Wall Street Journal poll that came out just Monday morning. Asked about about their feelings towards the candidates, 56% had positive feelings about Obama, while 47% said the same for McCain. Those numbers on Obama are higher than anything we've ever seen since Ronald Reagan.
Interesting. I mean, very interesting. Those numbers are significant. And I think there has been that enthusiasm gap all along. And I think some of it's also attributable to the kind of personality that John McCain has. The things about him that are likable don't necessarily translate onto a national stage. I mean, McCain he's very funny, but his wit's very dry and kind of caustic. And when you sort of, put that out on a national stage in a campaign, it just doesn't translate. He doesn't give people the warm fuzzies, I don't think, and certainly never has in sort of his political dealings. He's great on the one-on-one, great on the small group. People like him, but the things they like about him don't necessarily translate to mass appeal, it seems. Also, he just never appealed to big parts of the Republican base. There were a lot of people, who really felt like they were holding their nose and being John McCain supporters. That was never really the case with Barack Obama. He got enthusiastic supporters from the early days.
By the way, we're going to go back to Dixville Notch in just a moment. Apparently, the counting of the ballots there is almost complete, and we expect the official announcement there from the Balsams Resort. Again, this is Dixville Notch is about 3.5 or so hours north of Manchester, New Hampshire. It's actually a lot closer to the Canadian border than it is, say, to Massachusetts. And again, it's just this sort of very quaint tradition that has been going on for 48 years. We always see it to the night of the New Hampshire primary at midnight and, of course, in the general election. But it also sort of goes to show that there is such a great sort of intrigue and interest in just voting, that so many people, whether it's Dixville Notch, New Hampshire, or all the way in California or Hawaii or Alaska, everyone seems to recognize the historic nature this time around of this campaign, and you just get the sense that everyone wants to be part of it regardless of who they're supporting. Yes,
but there are a lot of people actually this year who are voting early, so they're sort of missing out, in some ways, on that sort of day, that voting election day where you get the sticker, you go into the booth. And some people are a little bit concerned that sort of chips away at this sort of maybe even nostalgic feeling that we have about voting. When you leave voting open for a month at a time, of course that's good for people who are disabled or elderly and can't get to the polls, but there's some people who I think kind of feel like that there's something missing there, that feeling of a collective one-day event where all these things happen, like these traditions like Dixville Notch.
And again, now at Dixville Notch, it's such a sort of thing you only see in elections. I mean, Dixville Notch, to get there, and it looks like they are about to put up some of the results. And we are waiting now, and again, some of the picture that you're seeing, these are employees of the resort. They work there, and so some of them vote, and some family members and whatnot. And in fact, the manager and I believe the owner of the resort now is related to Neil Tillotson, who died at the age of 102, as we said. Just about 5 or 6 years ago, and he was the one who started this tradition, and many members of his family have since sort of carried on the tradition. And again, it's become this rite of passage where you get sometimes 3 times as many members of the media as you get people who are voting. But again, as we wait for these first results, obviously not the first voting because of all the early voting that's happened in this election, a lot of people have cast ballots, but these would be the first results announced. And again, it feels like this has been such a long campaign, and when you see those pictures of people sort of mulling around and waiting for the first results, there's such a great anticipation there.
There is, and I think that people are feeling very positive about this election. In the poll you mentioned earlier, actually there was something really interesting in that poll, that this election has made, I think it was like 34% of people more proud to be an American, and that that didn't really come down on Republican or Democratic side. It was just that just participating in this has been a positive experience for people, which I found very interesting.
And what do you think explains that?
Well, I think that there's been such a high level of voter engagement this time around, and there has been a lot of negative campaigning of late, but most of it has been very substantive, and people have been very engaged. And I think that bringing people into the process, bringing new voters into the process, and having this debate, and having it be about things that people really wanted to talk about, the economy, having that being so present, going on in their lives, a crisis where they could actually watch the candidates respond to that in real time. I think that was really instructive and in some ways made this just an interesting process for anyone to go through.
Here are the results at Dixville Notch. Let's listen.
We're going to start from the top and go down. So first one, John McCain for president, 6 votes. Ralph Nader, no votes. Sorry, Ralph. And Barack Obama, 15 votes. For governor, Joseph Kenney,
Well,
3 votes.
Well, they've now, of course, moved on to the gubernatorial race up there and Senate race as well. But there are the first official results in this presidential election out of Dixville Notch. Barack Obama, 15. John McCain, 6. 21 ballots cast at the Balsams Resort in Dixville Notch. Usually Republican, but they have gone back and forth.